momentum going into 2024.
And maybe good for Americans. Like, I mean, his China policy, the fact that he came out with a statement on the Uyghurs, I thought was very strong. You know, it's one of the stronger things he did, but it's not coming up in the polls. And I think the whole Republicans interested in getting Hillary to run again is
let's be honest, nobody cares about what's happening to the Uyghurs, okay? You bring it up because you really care, and I think that's nice that you care. The rest of us don't care. I'm just telling you a very hard...
Wait, you're saying you personally don't care?
I'm telling you a very hard, ugly truth, okay? Of all the things that I care about, yes, it is below my line. Okay? Of all the things that I care about, it is below my line.
Disappointing.
Well, I think people, if you explain to them what's happening to the Uyghurs in China, they care, but it's not top of mind for them.
That's not
what's top of mind right now is they go to their grocery store and the shelves are empty.
Sure. That I care about. Yeah. I care about the fact that our economy could turn on a dime if China invades Taiwan. I care about that. I care about climate change. You know, I care about I care about America's crippling and, decrepit healthcare infrastructure. But if you're asking me, do I care about a segment of a class of people in another country? Not until we can take care of ourselves will I prioritize them over us. And I think a lot of people believe that. And I'm sorry if that's a hard truth to hear. But every time I say that I care about the Uyghurs, I'm really just lying if I don't really care. And so I'd rather not lie to you and tell you the truth. It's not a priority for me.
And my response to that is, I think it's a sad state of affairs when human rights as a concept globally, falls beneath, tactical and strategic issues that we have to have. We need to have a high watermark.
That's another luxury belief.
I don't believing in the Human Declaration of Human Rights that Eleanor Roosevelt created with the United Nations. I don't think it's a luxury belief to believe that all humans should have a basic set of human rights.
I think it's a luxury belief.
Right.
And the reason I think it's a luxury belief is we don't do enough domestically to actually express that view in real, tangible ways. So until we actually clean up our own house, the idea that we step outside of our borders with us sort of like morally virtue signaling about somebody else's human rights track record is deplorable. Look at the number of black and brown men that are
far from deplorable.
Look at the number of black and brown men that are incarcerated for absolutely ridiculous crimes. I don't know if you saw this past week, but there was a person that was released from jail because he couldn't even be protected in jail because in some of these cells, they run these fight clubs inside of Rikers Island that are basically tacitly endorsed by the corrections officers that don't do anything.
And the difference?
So hold on, Jason. So if you want to talk about the human rights of people, I think we have a responsibility to take care of our own backyard first. And then we can go and basically morally tell other people how they should be running their own countries.
The difference is, Chamath, saying what you just said in China or Saudi Arabia would put you in jail and get you 100 lashes and you would be tortured for a decade. We here in the United States are far from perfect. We still have the death penalty, which is against the United Declaration of Human Rights, which we signed, which Eleanor Roosevelt created in the UN. And we propagated as Americans around the world. We started that, Chamath. And we can have these discussions about being better in this country. And the whataboutism that you're proposing is so disproportional to the equivalent of the Holocaust going on. We're talking about 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps right now. To talk about what we have here that we need to fix and compare it to that, or to Saudi Arabia whipping bloggers and throwing gay people off roofs for being gay, these two things are not morally comparable. They are very far. And we need to have open discussions and talk about human rights all the time. Because if we do not talk about it all the time, then your position, which is, I don't have time for that, I want to solve my problems, then gives the green light to dictators everywhere that nobody's watching. We need to have vigilance. And that's what I find. And I think we need to work
hold on
on
a second.
Your position.
That's not what I said. And that's not true.
You said you can't get up for it.
Yeah. So tell me how.
Problem.
Are you saying that the situation with the Uyghurs is the same as the Holocaust?
People who are Jewish are making that comparison. You never make a Holocaust comparison.
I'm asking you,
I think it is comparable. There are upwards of 1 million people in a concentration camp right now. This is getting to numbers that are actually comparable. It is actually a valid comparison.
You're saying there are 1 million people in a concentration camp?
That is the numbers that human rights organizations are saying. Between 300,000 and 1 million people are incarcerated right now, being tortured, raped, and doing forced sterilization, re-education, and when they're released are being tracked in ghettos.
And so are you
Jewish
saying the
people
entire
are bringing
world,
this up.
Hold on. Are you saying
as a comparison?
You're saying the entire world has basically decided that doesn't matter?
You just said you can't get up for it. I'm talking about you specifically.
But who is getting up? Well, who is getting up for it?
I am very up on it. I talk about it all the time, every week.
What about the U.S. government? What are they doing about it?
Biden just said we are going to do a ban and we are going to sanction companies that do business in that region. So
Apple and Tesla?
I think there will be increased pressure on all companies that are engaging in China over human rights.
It's goods that are sourced from those areas, right?
Correct. Yes.
It's not doing business there. It's if your supply chain comes from that area.
Correct. And it's a first step.
Like we won't buy Nazi goods, but we'll sell our iPhones into Nazi Germany.
Well, if you want to have a discussion about this, it's how do we disengage from China? We've had this discussion here. What amount of time will it take to disengage from countries that have brutal dictatorships that are committing human rights atrocities?
But again, I think I'm spending a lot of time and money actually trying to fortify America's supply chain. You guys know about some of the things that I'm doing.
Absolutely, it's fantastic.
I'm not doing that from a moral perspective. I'm doing that from a practical capitalist perspective. I think the jobs are better served for Americans. And I think that we should have the ability to build our own businesses, just like China has the right to do for themselves, without the risk of these things being undercut by policies that we don't understand, which is effectively what you do when you outsource your supply chain to countries where you're not 100% aligned with them.
Yeah, and they're dictatorships.
So I'm not even sure that China is a dictatorship the way that you want to call it that. Again, I think
communist country that's in the name.
Look, you have to understand, Jason, there are a set of checks and balances here on China that, at the end of the day, I don't think that I have the moral absolutism to judge China. And I would say that when NATO is silent, the United Nations is silent, all of Western Europe is silent, and America is effectively silent, that this issue may be small data points being extrapolated in a way to create a narrative that maybe not be true. And if it is true, Jason, there's a responsibility for those body politics to do something, because that is the early warning signal that the rest of the world uses to say, okay, hold on, let me reprioritize my list of things. So I guess what I'm saying is I am not going to be an armchair journalist on this topic, nor am I going to be the armchair human rights advocate for the world, because I just don't know. I can focus on the things that I know about, build the things that I know about. And if something really does get red light status, then other parties will do something. And again, I just want to be clear. NATO is silent. United Nations is silent. America is silent. A press release doesn't change the actual technical posture on these topics.
Okay. If your position is that human rights matters to you, if large government organizations or politicians give you the green light to care about it, that's fine. I care about it intrinsically every day.
Great. I'm fine with you doing that.
I thought there was a segue there to talk about the Ray Dalio thing that Friedberg cares about. This debate that you're having between kind of realism and idealism in foreign policy is sort of what Dalio tackles, right, Friedberg?
Look, it sounds to me like there's, let's just say, a red herring. There always needs to be, as Chamath points out, a narrative on framing our enemy when, you're running out of land. You guys saw this, was it a journal article or New York Times article that came out today that U.S. intelligence revealed that Putin had actually put some actors into the eastern Ukraine to set up for a reason to have a response and therefore an excuse to invade the Ukraine. So he was trying to create a bit of a fireworks show to give him an excuse. We always need a narrative that we can sell to our citizens. And so, there's not going to be a lot of, patting on the back of China right now. As we've talked about, there is this, overarching multi-100-year economic cycle, call it geopolitical cycle, that the United States and China are about to clash on. And in order for them to clash effectively, we need to get the narrative right, which is to paint them as the bad guy and to make things evil. And look, you may take your ethical framework and say that they are bad, and you may be able to take other parts of your ethical framework and looking objectively, call some countries that you consider good bad as well, depending on what story you want to tell yourself and what story you want to be told. And I think that's what's going on and will continue to go on for a long period of time. And this Uyghur thing, as Chamath pointed out, how do you measure on an absolute basis human rights? I don't think that there's a way to do so. Whether it's one person getting tortured publicly in a street or 100,000 people being suppressed economically and not being able to get jobs, it's hard to say what is appropriate, what is not, what is evil, what is not. At the end of the day, we create narratives, and that narrative allows the bigger picture to kind of play itself out. And I think that's what's going on largely. And I don't think we're going to hear a lot of good news about China for the next decade from any politician in the United States or anyone that wants to defend our political and economic interests globally, which are certainly being challenged by China right now. So I don't know. That's my diatribe about the Dalio. Look, Dalio obviously does a great job of kind of simplifying and eloquently stating what's going on. But I think this is one of many, many manifestations of it.
You need only read what the UN, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, The Guardian, the New York Times, this is not up for question.
Why do you think you're so wound up about this and you're not wound up about what's going on in Somalia?
Oh, no.
Or you're not wound up about what's going on in Saudi Arabia? Or you're not wound up about what's going on in eastern Ukraine?
Hold on a second. There are human rights violations all over the world. I comment on them, and I have commented on them for decades since I worked at Amnesty International, which is where I started my career. I've been passionate about this since the age of 18 or 19 when I worked at Amnesty International. You said that you cannot grade these things, right? You just said it's hard to compare these things, and this is a problem. You can actually do that. There are human rights violations like freedom of speech, which is a great aspiration, but we would say torture, murder, systematic rape, and sterilization are more intense and horrific than just freedom of speech. So if you look at Hong Kong, when they shut down Apple News, that's one level of human rights, right? People have lost their ability for free speech.
Again, you're telling stories.
These are not stories, these are facts. Apple News was shut down.
You are telling a fact about a particular set of experiences that are particularly harming a set of people. Let me give you another fact. In the United States, where we have a population of, let's be generous and say 400 million people, 2.3 million...
340 million.
340 million Americans, 2.3 million of whom are incarcerated.
Absolutely.
In China, with a population of 1.4 billion, 1.7 million Chinese are incarcerated.
Absolutely something we have to deal with.
Where is human rights being violated on an absolute basis? It's a very difficult conversation to use facts and figures because at the end of the day, there's a lot of data that can be pointed the other way. And so it all comes down to narrative. And that narrative always has an objective, which is what are you trying to get people to believe and what are you trying to get them to get behind and get to do?
Yes.
And what are you trying to justify?
Yes.
And the actions...
Well, Friedberg, they don't have a drug problem over there because they killed all the drug dealers. Mao put them up against the wall and shot them. So,
They just send their fentanyl here.
That's fair enough. But I'm just saying, look, and it's a very good point, which is you can actually take the data and you can slice it and tell different stories around it. But at the end of the day, it's very hard to say there's good and there's evil that we have to go and attack. And that is what is going...
I never said attack. I didn't say invade China over this. And I didn't say invade Saudi Arabia. I think we should talk about it.
Increase the temperature, raise the temperature,
no,
right?
I did not say that either. If you want to know what I think should happen, you can
political pressure on them, right?
I think when people are involved in torture, murder, rape, and sterilizing people, that there should be economic and disengagement that occurs as a first step. And that is why when people in our circles, in venture capital, take money from somebody who murdered a journalist, Mohammed bin Salim, MBS from Saudi Arabia, we should disengage from a country like that. I believe that is what we should do. And I believe people like us who are capital allocators and are creators and who are influencers should be talking about human rights all the time. And we should be familiar with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and we should read what's in it and we should aspire to hit those notes in our country and everywhere else. And this Me Tooism, this equivalency problem that you guys keep bringing up, that is a trap. That is an intellectual trap because there is no equivalency from detaining 1 million people, putting hundreds of thousands of them and torturing them to what's happening in the United States where we wrote the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and where we can have conversations about it. If you tried to have the conversation we are having here, we would all be tortured in Saudi Arabia. We would all be tortured and detained inside of China.
I just think that there's a very dangerous thing that you're doing, which is you are ranking and which is essentially assigning some sort of, let's just call it economic value to those things that you just described, torture, rape, forced sterilization. But I think then you're ignoring how do you actually economically rank systemic racism in the United States? What happens in our inner city school system? What happens to Black and brown men? What happens to the families of those people? What happens to how the lobbies basically break down the healthcare system. All I'm saying is, Jason, if you take your argument to the extreme, you start to get into all these areas of gray where it's impossible to assign economic realities to those things so that you can actually rank and rate. That's why I do think that. Yeah, because what do you mean by
economic? We're talking about
you're numerically ranking these things.
No. I never use a numeric. I'm just saying one is proportionally different.
Sure.
I'm not putting economic. I never use the term proportion.
If those really bad things happen 10 times and these kind of bad things happen 10,000 times, which one's worse?
I think if you asked anybody who is in a Uyghur prison being sterilized, tortured, and raped,
I'm asking you
if they would rather be, yes. I mean, you could actually do this test.
Jason, I'm asking you a question. If 10 Uyghurs were raped or forced sterilized,
yes,
versus 10 million black men falsely incarcerated, which one is worse?
Yeah, this is not the way to do the calculus. You could do it on an individual basis. You can look at an individual inside of a prison being tortured and an individual living in the United States. Every single person who is inside of that torture chamber, being raped, being sterilized, would say, I would absolutely love to come to America. That's why everybody wants to come to this country and live in a free democracy where they can speak freely, they can practice whatever religion they want and not be tortured. And what you're doing by adding up all the tiny pain and suffering that we have here in America, and then trying to conflate that with these horrific acts, you have to look at exactly how horrific these are on an individual basis. Just like we did with George Floyd. We see George Floyd happen. That is something that is absolutely worth being outraged about at a higher level, right? You have to stop for a second and say, oh my God, this has to be resolved. We can do these two things at the same time. We can refine our education system here.
George Floyd
stopping
actually,
the Uyghurs being sterilized.
I think George Floyd proves my point, because there's been innumerable number of black men that have been murdered with nary a thing that's ever happened in the United States. But it happened in an exact moment where the sum of all of these other things that happened before had just compounded to a point where the whole thing spilled over, and enough people decided to basically say the sum total of this damage now is the equivalent of a very meaningful human rights violation.
You can work on both these things at the same time, is my point. And this, you're basically giving a pass by kind of conflating these two things in my mind. You can work on both these issues. You could want to stop abhorrent torture and murder and rape while wanting to make our justice system better, while wanting to make our education system better. You don't have to pick one, Chamath.
I think you do, actually.
No, you do not. We could absolutely create...
There's nothing I can do about the Uyghurs in China. Zero.
Absolutely there is. You could not capital allocate to regions or to companies that are engaging.
But I don't have any Xingshanese startups.
Perfect. And if you do see one, you could do that. And you could also speak up about it.
I can't, because they can't get out of China. What are you talking about?
Do you take money from Saudi Arabia?
No.
Okay, great. So you made and did you make a moral decision about that?
No.
Okay. If you did get offered $1 billion, would you take it from them?
And by the way, to be honest, there's a bunch of my companies that have been supported by folks who have taken money from them. And
I know. That's a problem.
When I look, what's the bigger problem? Is it that the solution that these guys they're designing for mental health or diabetes or, housing or whatever it is this startup does when they take money from SoftBank or whomever, all of a sudden they should be canceled and not be able to do that?
I didn't say canceled. Just take the money from somebody different. Nobody said canceled.
Where?
I don't know. Coatue? Pick another firm. Goldman? I don't know who doesn't take Saudi money.
So should the United States create a program where whenever you ever get a term sheet from SoftBank or anybody with money from...
Didn't say that.
PIF, you should just be able to go and redeem it for somebody else's money?
I never said that either. I think each individual, a capital allocator like yourself, and a CEO should make what they believe is a morally right decision.
Well, they voted and they don't care about this issue. They're voting with their dollars
and I'm advocating that people should care about human rights and they should care about who they make money for. I know I'm a lone voice, but I believe you should care about who you're making money for.
Jason, I'm just saying something very subtle. I'm not saying that what you believe is wrong. In fact, I think it's beautiful and wholeheartedly right. What I'm saying is when everybody else tries to nod their head and agree with you in the moment, they're just morally virtue signaling in a luxury belief that they themselves don't exhibit, they don't make any changes towards, and it's largely because they don't believe that this is an issue. And I'm just putting it on the table as it just is true, based on everybody's behavior, maybe other than you.
I agree with you.
But everybody else is voting.
I would like to change everybody's behavior.
And I think you can offer your opinion and maybe you will change some people's minds.
I'm sure there are some people listening here, and I know there are some founders who would not take money from SoftBank and would not take money from Saudi Arabia. And I know there are some capital allocators who will not take money from dictatorships.
I think that you're also forgetting that there has been, as it seems, again, from very, very far away looking in, a lot of things that they have been able to do that is really constructive. They've actually created some pretty decent ties to Israel. They've actually started to create a path to normalize relations in the Middle East. They've organized against what could be the real threat there, which is, a nuclear empowered Iran. So just to put things in perspective, Jason, it's kind of like you have to look at the totality of the situation. Again, in the United States today, if you just looked at that one simple thing, you can cherry pick all kinds of reasons why many other companies shouldn't accept American capital. Because, we don't really exactly have our shit together either.
Proportion of these issues is the issue.
I think what Chamath is saying is the world is complicated. I mean, so under the previous president, they said there could never be like a peace in the Middle East or a deal between Israel and Arab powers. And there was the Doha Agreement where you had 3 Arab states signing peace treaties with Israel and Saudi Arabia allowing flights between Saudi Arabia and Israel for the first time. And that's all because of MBS. And there was an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about how King Salman actually was holding MBS back on this because, he's from part of the previous generation who was backing the Palestinians. And MBS just wants to move forward and actually get a deal done with Israel. And if the Palestinians won't make it, then he's willing to move forward without them. And this is not me saying this. This is the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
We need to dig up that piece. So all I'm saying, look, what happened with that journalist was absolutely wrong. But clearly, like, foreign relations is very complicated, especially in the Middle East. And it's not clear that, like, net.
Saudi Arabia probably just did the one wrong thing, which is that every country engages in extrajudicial killings. They just got caught. Right? Because I don't think it's fair to say
they
that
they also killed a journalist.
I think that Americans have done that. Okay. We've done that as well.
A journalist?
Absolutely. I don't think you actually have any idea the extent of what we have done during the course of these wars in all of these countries. I don't think you know.
Well,
I don't think I know.
Yeah. So by saying,
I think that the tip of the spear,
nobody knows if we chopped up a journalist who criticized. Well,
do you know who was in Abu Ghraib? Do you really know? Do you know of all the other?
One of the worst things we ever did, and one of the things we need to aspire to do better.
Jason, we've gone blundering around the Middle East for 20 years now. In Afghanistan, we supported warlords in Afghanistan who we were allies with, who were raping young boys. I mean, this was like a giant series of articles in the New York Times.
Oliver North, Iran-Contra. I mean, we've been doing this since the 80s.
But even more recently, in Libya, we basically got rid of Gaddafi and plunged that whole country into civil war, and it's never recovered from it. So look, I actually, Jason, I'm somewhere in between. I actually agree with your idealism. My mind's still blown that you actually work for Amnesty International. But I just think that the world is more complicated than that, and sometimes we have to make choices. And the thing that concerns me is that idealism that you're citing has become a prelude and a pretext for war over the last 20 years. And
to be clear, I'm not advocating
we keep blundering around the globe, getting into these conflicts. Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. What good has that done us?
Yeah, I'm anti-war. I'm anti-war. I'm not advocating for invading places. I'm advocating that we speak up when we see Saudi Arabia take a blogger, Rafi Badawi.
Everybody did. I mean, that was universally condemned. But the question is, at the end of the day,
who is being caned for writing blog posts.
What's our alternative in Saudi Arabia? Who's our alternative there? We don't get to pick and choose who the leaders of these countries are.
I'm talking specifically about entrepreneurs, capital allocators. That doesn't mean we need to engage in business and building their chip stack.
If you want the sternly worded press release, you just got it from Biden. Hopefully it peaks, it satisfies, it quenches your thirst, because the only other solution... I want to see
us talking about it. Actually, if you want to know what I want to see the three of you speak up for human rights. That's what I would like to see.
I think that human rights in the United States is way more important to me than human rights anywhere else in the globe.
Okay.
And I think that we have an abysmal track record of taking care of colored men and women in this country.
And I don't disagree.
And so I have zero patience and tolerance for white men blathering on about shit that happens outside your own backyard. Fix your own inside backyard, because you guys
hold on. Human rights here as well.
Hold on, because you guys are the ones.
And you do not get to diminish me for being white.
No, I understand, but I'm saying that you are uniquely in a position of power in a way that the rest of us are not. And so when you guys clean up the inside, then we can go and fix the outside.
Yeah, I believe we can do both. I believe we can do the same thing at the same time. We could speak about human rights here. We could speak about it in Saudi Arabia. We could speak about it in China, and we could talk about the same thing. We could talk about all the human rights issues from freedom of speech to murder. I do constantly. Look at my Twitter feed.
If you care so much about journalists, why haven't you spoken up in favor of Snowden and Assange the way that Glenn Greenwald has?
Of Julian Assange?
Assange and Snowden. Read Glenn Greenwald's reporting on these topics. I think
that we need to get to the bottom of both of those. In either case, we don't know the full information.
You've acted with complete certainty on Twitter saying that these guys are traitors and should be locked up in U.S. prisons.
Oh, no. I think we don't know. I don't think we know who they're working for.
Why haven't you spent the time to learn?
No, well, I mean, it is a black box in that case. We don't know in both of those cases what the backstory is. I do have a nuanced position on that.
You know about what's going on with the Uyghurs because you read a New York Times article?
So
why don't you read the New York Times article about Snowden and
we have had people who have we have people who have defected and been on 60 Minutes who were in those prisons.
You believe what you want to believe.
No, you literally can believe somebody who escaped from the prison. You can believe them, yes. When it comes to Julian Assange, I don't know what to believe exactly because he released all those data dumps and he didn't do it properly like a journalist where he vetted the information. With Snowden, I'm more inclined to think that he was a good actor, and I think it's a very nuanced position. So if you want to try to paint me as like not knowing everything about every human rights violation in the world, every nuanced position of a leaker, that's correct. I don't know everything about everybody, but I'm going to
take that position. I don't know anything about any of these things, which is why I choose to focus on the things that I can control. And I want to believe that I want to improve my own backyard.
Which I think is absolutely great. And I think you can add an end there, which is you should be talking about human rights in Hong Kong, should be talking about in Saudi Arabia, and should be talking about in China. Okay. Not my problem is the problem right now.
Not my problem.
I believe that's part of the problem right now. You said it. You said it perfectly, Chamath. People don't care about human rights anymore. There's a large group of people, I agree with you, who do not care about human rights the way we did.
I think previously. They care about the local version of human rights.
Fine. Yeah. And I think you need to care about all of them and talk about all of them at the same time.
The international adventurism around human rights, I don't support in the least. And I do feel that a lot of this stuff is like the tip of the spear of people who then get morally absolute and say, we have to fix this. And the only solution is to invade these countries. And instead, I would just rather them, if they really care about it, let them stand up and do what they need to do. I think we need to fix our own backyard.
I mean, look, not to kind of bolster Chamath's point, but there is a blind eye turned to that which we don't want to believe or that narrative which we don't want to sell. And then we point towards the narrative that we do. And we see this all the time, where the focal point of where should we be addressing human rights issues is where we have economic and geopolitical interest. No one seems to be solving the problem in Somalia. No one's getting on stage talking about the issues that people are facing in countries outside of where we have deep-rooted trade partnerships and serious economic interest. And so, like we can tell ourselves all day long that we need to be kind of the absolutists and absolutely take care of the world because we're the beacon for human rights. But the challenge is we end up being forced to choose where we want to spend our time and our resources. And our resources go to where those resources flow back to us. And that's often where we have a geopolitical and economic interest.
Now, Jason,
I'll say one more thing, like just because it's important, J. Cal, because you called us all out. I am an absolute human rightist in the sense that I believe every human on earth should have a right to do whatever they want within their own sphere of influence, provided their sphere of influence does not intersect with the sphere of influence of others. End of story. And I don't see that happening anywhere on earth. And this ends up being a trade-off. You always end up trading off your sphere of influence for that of the greater good or someone else because power allocates and power aggregates to specific places, often to government, sometimes to organize societal decisions that we say we're going to trade off our individual rights and freedoms for that of the greater collective. And it is that judgment and it is that gray area where all of these issues that we individually choose to address and spend our time on arise. And so I have, just to point out, like, a very absolute point of view on this. But to me, the challenge is, how do you make a discernment? How do you make a determination that imprisonment of brown and black people in the United States versus the treatment of people by militia in Somalia versus the treatment of the Uyghurs in China versus, and you go on and on and on, it's a very difficult moral judgment.
Or you could just say they're all wrong.
They are all wrong.
They are all wrong, but I don't care about the other two.
And we're going to talk,
see, but you work on all of them, you work on none of them.
And I would rather see innovation enable more people to have access to more free speech, to have more resources, to have more of an ability to climb and have the freedom to do the things they want to do with their life, I think that innovation and technology can bring all of these old school ways of thinking and behaving out of the medieval ages and the dark ages. And so that's where I choose to spend my time. How can we unleash people's freedom? We got to make things more available. We got to make things more accessible.
I just want to make 2 points and then maybe we can move on this topic. Point number one is when you're an immigrant, part of what you're doing is you're actually voting against the place that you leave to embrace the place that you come to. And Jason, of all the four of us on this pod, you're the only natural born American, right? You started here, you've lived your entire life here. And that's an incredible blessing that you were given. And the three of us weren't. And, in my case, I had to go through an even more circuitous path. I didn't even come to the United States first. I had to go through Canada. But implicitly, when I look at the places that I left, and specifically, when I look at Sri Lanka, who, has a very checkered human rights record, in fact, terrible in some ways. And the way that they ended the war against the Tamils, atrocious. I have to make a decision, right? I have to make a decision about, is this something that I'm going to wade into or not? And what I've realized through my own life's journey is these are not my battles. And in many ways, I abdicated my responsibility to vote on that issue when I left. And instead, I stay here and I focus on the things that I can control here. And I think that I do have a responsibility to fix the issues of the country that adopted me. And so that's where some of my framework comes from. Separately, I do want to give all three of us a shout out because I do think that there is an enormous human rights issue that I do think we did bring up, and in the last few weeks has become a real groundswell. And it started on the, year in recap pod where we talked about what's happened to our kids. And I just want to call out that in the last few weeks, the amount of press attention that this issue has gotten, which I do think is a human rights level issue, which is the cognitive impairment of our children, has really come front and center. And I think that it's really, really incredible, all the way to even Nature now publishing these, and maybe the timing is just coincidental, but these big longitudinal studies that really show that, we have driven a level of retardation in our children. We have held them back from a level of learning and development that we now have thrown our arms up in the air. We don't know what the real long-term impact is. That, I think, is a human rights level issue. And domestically in the United States, I think we're in a position to fix it if we decide to take care of it. So, again, I don't mean to offend you when I say that in my prioritization list, it's below the line, but there are different human rights issues that I care about. And I think
to be clear, I know, when you said I called everybody out here, I'm trying to have a productive discussion. Friedberg, I'm not trying to put him in a spot.
I don't get offended. I'm not offended.
No, I'm trying to have a productive discourse.
I don't get offended at anything. Here.
Okay. But I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to call out besties here. I'm trying to have a productive dialogue about human rights.
Would you take money from Prince Alaweed? He's one of the largest investors in the world.
No, I wouldn't.
He owned
not. He's a Saudi investor. Yeah, he's a Saudi investor.
So if they're just a citizen of Saudi Arabia, you wouldn't.
If the money comes from a dictatorship, from an authoritarian country, I would 100%.
Well, no, Jason, he was locked up. He was locked up at the Ritz, and he was forced to give a bunch of his money. So it wasn't clear.
Doesn't he mostly live out of the country anyway? I mean,
again, if his money, if you're asking me, let's put aside a specific person. I'll just tell you my philosophy.
He's a citizen or a former citizen of that country.
He was born there, J-Cal.
Yeah, I agree. Let me just tell you, I would never take money from an authoritarian regime.
Would you take money from a Chinese billionaire?
No, I would not take it from a Chinese. No, I would not take it from a Chinese. If I,
well, they're not an authoritarian regime. The
Chinese are not an authoritarian regime.
No, we're talking about a Chinese billionaire.
If the Chinese billionaire was outspoken about I would tell you, it's a great thought question. And I'm just riffing here. It's a great thought experiment. If a Chinese billionaire had left China and was
would you take Chamath's money? Because Chamath has violated your human rights at the poker table many times.
That's true. That's true. He has turned over 2-7 going all in when I have 2 pair. And I'm like, I guess he's got a set. And he just absolutely tortures me.
Yeah.
So, but no, I would not. I would, if the person was a reformer, yes, I would consider it.
Jason, I guess what you're saying is you, and this is your decision to make.
My decision, yes.
It's important for you that you understand what people's personal belief systems are when you take money from them.
No, human rights is important to me.
Well, that's what I'm saying, their personal belief system. You wouldn't care less if they were an illicit drug user, right? For somebody else. So for example, I'll give you an example. So I did take money from a Chinese billionaire when I first started Social Capital. I'm not going to say who it is.
No need.
But there was a morality clause, and there were certain things that were incredibly important to this person. And they were very easy for me to reflect because they were nothing that I cared about. But, they explicitly didn't want certain kinds of investments in...
Well, there's gambling, cannabis, sex, porn.
Well, for me, the list was gambling, alcohol, anyway, my point is, you're fine signing up to those moral judgments from an investor.
Am I?
But not necessarily, silence on... I'm asking you the question. You would be fine signing up for those moral delineation of what you can and can't do, even if it's not against what you believe. But you have a different issue when it comes to silence on these other topics.
Yeah, I would. Here's how I'll answer the question. If I'm taking other people's money to invest it and they don't want to invest in the adult, I don't have a problem with cannabis as an example. I don't have a problem with wagering and gambling. But if I'm building a fund to invest in businesses, that's not an important issue for me. And I don't know that's a great venture investment. And I can also invest outside of it my own money. So it's a more nuanced issue there. Like I have invested in wagering apps, and I'm thinking about creating a syndicate specifically for gambling and wagering. And yes, there are LPs who I currently have in my previous fund, the active fund, that I do not invest in wagering because of that. So yes. And it's because they just want clarity in some cases on not getting sued for investing in a wagering companies where we don't have a federal mandate yet. So, I think comparing, these are great thought experiments and important discussions to have. But human rights transcends everything for me.
I was fine signing up for no alcohol because my father was an alcoholic. And so it was morally
in line.
And there was a certain investor who at one point tried to be an LP, very well-known person who was convicted of domestic abuse. And I didn't take that money because I had been the victim of domestic abuse as my mom.
Yep.
And so that was a moral issue for me. The point I'm trying to make to you, Jason, is that it's very nuanced. Everybody can be on a bunch of different sides of this thing. And I tend to think the most consistent, reliable thing is that these are very local beliefs. That when they touch you, you have a point of view on them. And I think that, it's much more practical, and maybe this is just being too practical, to see a world where people want to fix their own backyard first. And I think a lot of why you may be disappointed that a lot of people don't have a stronger view on things like China is people are a little exhausted with having moral views about things that are so far away when things in their own backyard are so broken.
Yeah. And I can understand that exhaustion. And to be clear, I just feel like human rights is such an obvious and easy one to get behind for all humans. And
from
that really
your perspective.
And that's what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was about, was we were hoping that all countries in the United Nations, or Eleanor Roosevelt was, that we could all just agree that torture was immoral. And when the United States waterboarded
but
people
the United
and
States
Bush
can't
came
even
up with
agree
some...
whether the death penalty is immoral. So,
right. And you know what? That's something that, is our great failing, and we need to work on.
We're riddled with hypocrisy.
The Declaration of Human Rights here is an ideal. It's a goal. It's something to strive towards. And each country has places where they succeed and fail, and you can actually measure it. And we do measure it, actually. We do measure which countries have the worst record on human rights violations and which ones have the best.
I think these quantifiable scores are crazy.
No, they're not. You can literally look at how many women are raped in prison in one country versus another.
I understand,
how many people
but
are
my
tortured.
point is, when you put a score to that or count it, you're not counting a bunch of other things that are really bad as well.
The scoring system could be refined. Sure, I will give you that. And I think this is the debate we had today, which was an unexpected debate, and I didn't think we would go this deep here, I think is such an important debate for us to have as humans and as a civilization, because we are getting in the weeds on so many other issues, whether it's inflation or, innovation or politics, that human rights, I feel, is something we should all be able to agree on. That all people should be able to speak freely. It's the definition
that's, JCal, everyone says yes. The definition and the prioritization is where all the noise sits.
Yeah.
That's everything.
And how do we deal with violators?
There's no one on earth that's going to say, I don't believe in human rights.
Well,
right.
No.
We all agree with the ideals.
Everyone
agrees with the ideals. The question is how you implement them.
Implementation, prioritization, definitions.
Exactly. Like for example,
maybe in the West we do.
I think it's a legitimate position for you to say that you're not going to take money from dictators, but to then say that any family office from any individual who was born in that country, you're not going to take their money either.
I would have to think about it. I didn't say that. I said I would have to think about it.
Unless they're willing to risk their lives by denouncing their own government.
Well, I don't know that they have to do it. I don't know they have to do it publicly. I mean, if I talk to this hypothetical Chinese or Saudi person and they said, I don't agree with this, I'm a reformer, I guess I would have to consider it because
no, but,
you would
but
want to make money for the reformer.
But Jason, what if they said, I don't have a point of view?
Then I would go with people who...
would you morally disqualify them? You would disqualify them on moral grounds.
That's not the way to make allies, J-Cal, which is important.
Well, no, you're not letting me answer.
So look.
Hold on. I need to answer it if you're both going to ask me this question and accuse me of, this. I would have to make a nuanced decision on an individual basis. I would not make a blanket decision. That's my position on this hypothetical situation where somebody is a Saudi citizen, has a family office. I would have to make a very nuanced decision like you did, Chamath, where you didn't take the domestic abusers and you did take the person.
Well, that was an American, but I took the Chinese.
Okay, yeah, but it's the same thing. It's a human rights violation. It's a horrible thing that occurred, and you had to make a nuanced decision. And that's what I'm hoping to promote here, is that we have a dialogue about human rights again. Because when I was growing up in the 80s, this was something that the world was getting consensus on, and the West had consensus on. And I think the West is very weak now. And the fact that the NBA, that Apple, whatever companies, I don't want to call out individuals because it's not productive, especially if it gets reaggregated. And, I happen to know some of them. It's something that the West has to contend with of what is our strategy here with human rights violators? Do we engage them? Do we admonish them or somewhere in between? Do we disengage, engage, or, make our feelings heard and try to shape their behavior to bend towards human rights? And it's a very complicated, nuanced discussion. I'm glad we had it here today.
The time period you're talking about where we supposedly had consensus on this you said the 1980s, during the Cold War.
I was talking about in America. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
we talked about it a lot in America is my point.
Yeah. Well, I think Ronald Reagan did a really good job with this. He denounced the evil empire, but said that we should be a shining city on a hill. And we did. Yes. We actually avoided a bunch of unnecessary foreign wars.
100%.
So, look, I think the best way for us to lead on this issue is just to be an example, and we're not doing a very good job of that. I mean,
100%
your ideals are great, but the world doesn't neatly line up with those ideals and presents us with choices that don't fit those ideals. I mean, during the Cold War, we had a choice to support either communist regimes or, in a lot of cases, authoritarian regimes. And we chose the lesser of two evils. I think today we have choices between, do we want to support Islamic fundamentalist regimes or we want to support authoritarian regimes who are resisting it? I mean, those are the types of tough choices the world actually presents to us. And I think that's what makes it hard to stick to these ideals. My enemy's
enemy is my friend.
It's a complicated chessboard, and you're better at chess than me, Sacks, so I will give you that. And I think it's great that we had this discussion. I really do appreciate that you guys were willing to talk about this for so long. It's an important discussion because if we don't stand for human rights and basic human rights, what do we stand for? And I agree that domestic is important.
I stand for me.
Yeah, we know that. Tell us about the sweater. No can.